The rain had been falling since before dawn, and by mid-morning the streets of the small market town were slick and grey. Water ran along the edges of the stones and pooled in every low place. The air smelled of wet wool and horse and coal smoke from the chimneys. It smelled of the river, too, which was only 3 streets away and swollen with days of rain. People moved fast under the awnings, holding baskets close, keeping their heads down. Vivienne Marchmont pulled her cloak tighter as she stepped out of the small bookshop. The bell above the door made a soft sound behind her. She had a package tied with brown string, and she held it against her chest to keep it dry. The wind pushed her hood back a little, and a few strands of dark hair fell against her cheek. She did not stop to fix them. She had learned, over the years, not to fuss with her appearance in public. It drew attention she did not want. She was 25, which in her small circle of relatives was considered nearly the end of any hope. She had been out for 7 seasons now. She had watched younger girls come and go, watched them marry, watched them return with babies on their hips. She had smiled at all of them. She had never envied them out loud. But she had felt the years pile up on her shoulders the way snow piles on a garden wall in winter, quiet and heavy and slow. Her aunt had sent her out for a book of sermons. Her aunt read sermons the way other women read novels, with great feeling and long sighs. Vivienne did not mind the errand. It gave her an hour out of the house, an hour away from her cousin Prudence, who had a voice like a small saw and used it often. She turned the corner near the coachyard and heard the dogs before she saw them. There were 3 of them, big and lean, the kind of dogs that hung about the yards and lived on scraps. Their barking was sharp and mean. She heard a child cry out, thin and high, the sound of real fear. Not a game, not a scolding. Real fear. She did not think. She moved. The alley was narrow, cut between the coachyard and the back of an inn. The stones were dark with rain. At the end of the alley, pressed against the wet brick wall, was a small child, perhaps 6 years old, perhaps 7. It was hard to tell because the child was so thin. A boy. His feet were bare, his shirt was torn at one shoulder, he was holding a piece of bread against his chest with both hands, and he was crying without sound. The way children cry when they have already learned that no one comes when they cry loud. The 3 dogs stood in a rough half-circle in front of him. Their ears were flat, their tails were low. One of them had its lips pulled back from yellow teeth. Vivienne stopped only long enough to set her package down on a dry stone by the wall. Then she stepped forward, straight into the space between the dogs and the boy. "Hush now," she said. Her voice was not loud. It was steady. "Hush, hush," the dogs looked at her. The nearest one lowered its head and made a sound deep in its throat that was not quite a growl. She did not step back. She did not raise her voice. She held out one gloved hand, palm down, and let the dog smell it. Her heart was beating hard against her ribs, but her hand did not shake. She had learned about dogs from the old huntsman on her father's estate when she was a girl. He had told her that fear made them worse. He had told her that stillness was the answer. She had been 8 years old then, standing in a stable yard with a big rough dog sniffing at her fingers, and the old man had said, "Steady." "Miss, steady is a language they know." Behind her, the boy made a small sound. She could feel him back there, pressed against the wall. She could smell him too, the sour smell of a child who had not been washed in a long time, and beneath that the strange sweet smell of wet stone and river water. "Steady," she said, and she did not know if she was speaking to the dogs or to the boy or to herself. "Steady now." The nearest dog took another step forward. Vivienne did something then that she had never done in her life. She bent slowly, keeping her eyes on the dog, and picked up a small stone from the ground. She did not throw it. She held it in her palm, and she made a sound in her throat, low and hard, the way she had heard the huntsman make when a hound got out of line. It was not a shout. It was a sound that said, "I am the one here who is in charge." The dog's ears went back further. Its head dropped lower. "Go on," she said, very quietly. "Go on now." Off. For a long moment, nothing happened. The rain fell. Somewhere a horse stamped in the coach yard. A gull cried far off over the river. Vivienne kept her eyes on the dog's eyes. She did not blink. She did not move her hand. The dog turned its head away first. It happened in that small, sudden way that big things sometimes happen. The dog turned its head, and then its body followed, and then the other two dogs followed the first. They slouched down the alley toward the coach yard, wet and thin and defeated, and they did not look back. In a moment they were gone, around the corner. She could hear their claws clicking on the wet stone. Vivienne stood very still for another breath. Then she let the stone fall from her hand. It made a small, clean sound against the ground. She turned. The boy was staring at her with eyes that were far too old for his face. He was still holding the bread against his chest. His mouth was open a little, but he did not speak. She knelt down. The wet stone soaked through the knees of her dress at once, cold as a knife, but she did not stand up. "Are you hurt?" she asked. He shook his head. "Are you hungry?" He nodded. She almost laughed then, though there was nothing to laugh at. He was holding a whole piece of bread, and he was nodding that he was hungry. She understood. Bread now did not mean bread tomorrow. Bread now was only bread now. "What is your name?" she asked. He did not answer for a long moment. Then he said, in a voice as thin as paper, "Tom, Tom," she said. "That is a good name. Are you here with your mother, Tom?" He shook his head. "Your father?" He shook his head. "Anyone at all?" He shook his head a third time. He was not crying anymore, but his lower lip was pushed out in the way that children's lips push out when they are trying very hard not to. Vivienne looked at him. She thought about her aunt's house, with its clean floors and its cold rooms, and her cousin's sharp voice. She thought about the sermon book still tied up in brown paper by the wall. She thought about all the years of her life she had done what she was told, and all the years she had said nothing. She reached out and touched the boy's shoulder. He did not flinch, but he did not move toward her either. He simply stood there under her hand, small and wet and watching. "Come," she said. "You cannot stay here in the rain." She did not know, at that moment, that anyone had seen her. She had not looked up the alley. She had not looked at the arched opening onto the street. She had been busy with the dogs and the child, and her own beating heart. She did not see the tall man standing at the mouth of the alley, quite still, with his hat pulled low against the rain and his gloved hands hanging loose at his sides. She did not see him watching. She did not see the Duke of Ravensmere at all. He had come to the town on a matter of business, and he had come on horseback because he preferred it, and he had stopped at the inn to have his horse looked to before he rode on. He had been standing under the eaves of the inn when he heard the dogs. He had walked over out of habit, expecting to have to break up a fight or shout at a stable boy. He had reached the mouth of the alley just as she stepped between the dogs and the child. He had not moved. He had not called out. He had simply stood there and watched. He watched the whole of it. The slow, careful step forward. The gloved hand held out. The stone lifted and not thrown. The low sound in her throat. He watched the dogs turn away. He watched her kneel in the wet street beside a beggar child. He watched her ask his name. He was a man who had learned over many years to notice things about people that they did not know he was noticing. He noticed that she had not looked around to see if anyone was watching. He noticed that she had not made her voice sweet for the child. He noticed that she had knelt in a dress that must have been the best one she owned, without a thought for the wet or the mud. He noticed that she had spoken to the dogs the way she spoke to the boy, without pity in either voice. He was Alaric Thorne, the 7th Duke of Ravensmere, and he was 32 years old, and he had been to 100 rooms full of women who wanted to marry him. He had watched them practice their smiles at him. He had watched them arrange their hands. He had watched them pretend to be things they were not. He had never, in any of those rooms, seen a woman do what this one had just done in a wet alley behind an inn. He did not move as she helped the boy to his feet. He did not move as she picked up her brown paper package. He did not move as she began to walk back down the alley toward the street with the boy's hand in hers. She was going to have to pass within a few feet of him. She looked up when she was almost to the mouth of the alley, and she saw him. She stopped. He had not meant to be seen. He had meant to step back before she looked. But he had waited a moment too long, because he had been trying to see her face, and now he was still standing there, and she was looking at him with the kind of directness that most women had been taught out of by the age of 10. "Sir," she said, "only that." He touched the brim of his hat. "Madam," she looked at him for another breath. He saw her take in his coat, which was very fine, and his boots, which were finer, and the small silver pin at his throat, which she perhaps recognized as belonging to a family, and perhaps did not. Her face did not change. She did not curtsy. She did not lower her eyes. She simply looked at him as she had looked at the dogs, steady and clear and without fear. "You saw," she said. It was not a question. "I did." "Then you might have helped." He almost smiled. He did not, quite, but something in his chest moved that had not moved in a long time. "You did not need help," he said. She considered him for one more breath. Then she nodded, very slightly, and she walked past him with the boy in her hand. She did not look back. He watched her go until she turned the corner into the main street and was lost among the market crowd. Then he stood where he was for a long time. The rain fell on his hat and his shoulders. His horse would be waiting. His business would be waiting. His whole life would be waiting. He did not move. He was still standing there when the innkeeper came out to ask if His Grace required anything. And he turned to the innkeeper and said, "The young woman who just passed, in the grey cloak, with the child. Do you know her?" The innkeeper blinked. "I did not see her, Your Grace, but if she came from the town, someone will know." "Find out," said the Duke. "Do it quietly. I will be at the inn until evening." The innkeeper bowed and went back inside. The Duke stood a moment longer, then walked slowly back through the rain to his horse. That was how it began, though Vivienne did not know it yet, and would not know it for some time. She took the boy Tom to a woman she trusted, an old laundress named Mrs. Hollow, who lived at the edge of the town, and who had, in the past, taken in 1 or 2 children when no one else would. Mrs. Hollow did not ask many questions. She looked at the boy, and she looked at Vivienne, and she said, "Bring him in then, miss, and shut the door behind you, for the love of heaven, before the whole street catches its death." Vivienne left a small purse of coins on the table, without letting Mrs. Hollow see her do it. It was almost all the money she had of her own. She did not mind. She walked back to her aunt's house through the thinning rain, and she did not think about the tall man in the alley at all. Or she thought about him only once, and then she put him out of her mind, because she had learned long ago not to hold on to things that would only bruise her later. Her aunt met her at the door with sharp words about the state of her dress. Her cousin Prudence, hearing the noise, came out to the hall to add her own remarks. Vivienne handed over the sermon book without a word and went up to her room to change. She sat for a moment on the edge of her narrow bed. She looked at her hands. They were shaking now. They had not shaken in the alley. They shook now that it was safe. She pressed them together in her lap until they were still. 2 days later, a card was left at her aunt's door. It was a very good card, thick and cream-coloured, with a small crest pressed into the corner. The footman who brought it did not speak to any of the servants. He simply handed it in and left. The card was addressed to Miss Vivienne Marchmont. It was an invitation to a small evening at Ravensmere House, 4 days hence. Her aunt read the card 3 times. Then she looked at Vivienne with an expression that Vivienne had never seen on her aunt's face before. It was something close to suspicion. "Ravensmere," said her aunt. "That is a duke's house." "Yes, aunt. You have never met a duke." "No, aunt. Then how does a duke know your name?" Vivienne looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. She thought of the tall man in the alley. She thought, "He watched me. He watched me for a long time before I saw him." "I do not know, aunt," she said. And it was almost true. Her cousin Prudence's card was not included. Vivienne saw her aunt notice this. Her aunt's mouth grew thin. But the invitation was to Vivienne, and one did not refuse a duke, and so it was arranged that Vivienne would go, and that her aunt would go with her as chaperone, and that Prudence would stay home in a rage. The 4 days passed slowly. Vivienne did not have a gown fit for a duke's house. Her aunt fussed and complained, and finally sent for a seamstress and a length of silver silk that had been laid by for Prudence, and was now, in a small act of household revenge, cut down for Vivienne instead. Prudence wept and slammed doors. Vivienne stood very still on the seamstress's stool, and let herself be turned this way and that. She did not look at the mirror. She had learned not to. On the evening of the party, she came down the stairs in the silver silk, with her dark hair pinned up simply, and no jewels at her throat because she owned none. Her aunt looked at her once and made a small sound that might have been surprise. Then her aunt collected herself and said, "Do not embarrass me, girl, no aunt," said Vivienne. They went in the hired carriage. The wheels rattled on wet stones. Inside the carriage it smelled of old leather and her aunt's lavender water. Vivienne pressed her gloved hands together in her lap and looked out at the dark streets. She did not know why she had been invited. She thought perhaps the Duke wished to thank her for the child, if he was indeed the man who had stood in the alley, though she could not be certain of that either. She thought perhaps she was being brought only to make up numbers. She thought perhaps it was a mistake and she would be sent home in an hour. She did not think that anything real would happen. She had stopped thinking that a long time ago. Ravensmere House was set back from the street behind a tall iron gate. The gate was open. The drive was lined with lanterns. The house itself was long and low and old, made of pale stone. With windows that glowed warm against the dark, a footman opened the carriage door. Another footman held an umbrella over her head as she climbed the stone steps. Inside, the hall was full of candles, hundreds of them, in tall stands and in small clusters on every table. The smell of hot wax was thick and sweet. Under it there was another smell, colder and cleaner, that Vivienne after a moment realized was hothouse lilies. Somewhere a fiddle and a harp were playing something slow. The rooms were full of people. Not a great crowd, only some 30 or 40, but they were the kind of people Vivienne had only ever seen from a distance. Women in silk that shone like water, men with orders pinned to their chests, old women with sharp eyes, young women with sharper ones. A servant took her cloak. Another servant announced her name. No one looked up. That was fine. That was what she had expected. Her aunt at once found a chair by the wall and settled into it, and did not move. Vivienne understood. Her aunt was not going to embarrass herself by trying to speak to anyone. Her aunt was going to sit there and watch and complain about it all the way home. Vivienne walked slowly into the room. She did what she always did in rooms like this. She moved along the wall. She did not try to catch anyone's eye. She stopped near a tall pier glass and pretended to look at a picture on the wall above it, and while she did she smoothed one glove and then the other, slowly, finger by finger. It was her small routine in strange rooms. It gave her hands something to do. It gave her a reason to be alone in a room without seeming to be alone on purpose. The candles smelled of honey. The fiddle changed to a slower tune. Someone laughed too loudly, and then hushed themselves. Somewhere near the window a woman was speaking French in a low voice. Vivienne finished her gloves. She reached up and touched a curl at her temple, and put it back into place, and dropped her hand. It was a habit so old she did not know she was doing it. She did not know, either, that across the room a tall man had just stopped talking to a general in the middle of a sentence. He had turned his head at the announcement of her name. He had watched her come in. He had watched her walk along the wall. He had watched her fuss quietly with her gloves. He had watched her touch her hair. The general said something. The Duke did not hear it. The general said it again. "Forgive me," the Duke said. "I must speak to someone." He walked across the room. He did not walk fast. He did not walk in a way that would draw notice. He walked the way he always walked, which was with the calm heaviness of a man who had never in his life had to hurry to be listened to. But he walked past 3 women who had positioned themselves at 3 different points along his likely path. He walked past a father with 2 daughters at his elbow. He walked past a countess who had opened her fan and lifted her chin. He walked past all of them without seeming to see them. He walked directly to the far wall, where a small woman in silver was standing quite alone in front of a picture she was not really looking at. The whole room noticed. That was the thing. In a room like that, a duke did not simply walk past 3 women who had waited a week for him to come near them. It was noticed. Fans stopped. Conversation dropped a little. Heads turned, though carefully, as heads turn in rooms like that, so as not to seem to be turning. Vivienne did not see any of it at first. She was still looking at the picture. Then a voice at her elbow said, "Miss Marchmont." He said her name the way a man says a word he has been saying to himself for 4 days, not with surprise, not with formality. He said it as if he already knew it well. She turned. She had wondered, all those 4 days, If he would be the man from the alley. She had told herself he might not be. She had told herself the invitation might have come from someone else entirely. He was the man from the alley. He was taller than she had thought. Or perhaps he only seemed taller now that he was standing straight and not leaning against a wet doorway. His coat was black. His shirt was very white. His hair was dark and cut short. His eyes were grey and set deep, and they were resting on her face as if there were no other face in the room. She did not curtsy at once, though she knew she should. She looked at him for one long breath. "Your Grace," she said. "You knew then," he said. His mouth moved very slightly, in what was almost but not quite a smile. "In the alley." "I did not know," she said. "I know now. Because of the invitation. Because of your coat," she said, "and because dukes do not come to inns alone in the rain without a reason." He looked at her for another breath. Then he did smile, only a little, and only for a moment. It changed his face in a way that surprised her. "You have," he said, "a habit of saying the true thing. I have not had much practice at saying anything else, Your Grace. That is unusual. Only among your acquaintance, I should think." He almost laughed. He did not, quite, but his shoulders moved in a way that suggested it. Around them the room was still watching, though pretending not to. Vivienne could feel eyes on her back like small hot points. "Would you walk with me?" he said to the next room. "There is a picture there I should like you to see." She hesitated. He waited. He did not press her. He simply stood there and let her decide. "I do not know your motive, Your Grace," she said quite quietly. "No," he said. "You do not. But I have no plan to harm you. If you would rather stay by this wall, I will bid you good evening and return to the General, who is telling me a story I have already heard 4 times. She almost smiled at that. She did not. She said, "Very well." He offered his arm. She placed her gloved hand on it. It was a small, formal thing to do, but the moment her hand touched his sleeve, she felt the strength of the arm under the cloth. And she felt something else too, which she did not have a name for. She kept her face still. They walked through the room. Every eye followed them, though every face pretended not to. Her aunt, across the room, sat forward in her chair with her mouth open. Vivienne did not look at her aunt. She did not look at anyone. She walked at the Duke's side to the next room, and she did not stumble. And she did not tremble, though she wanted to do both. The next room was quieter. There were only a few people in it, and they moved politely away when the Duke came in. He led her to a picture near the fire. It was a small painting of a woman in a garden, holding a book. The frame was very old. "My grandmother," he said. "She was called a plain woman in her time. She was also called the wisest woman my grandfather ever met. He said once that he did not marry her for her beauty, and she said, when she heard it, that this was the only thing he had ever gotten right in 50 years. Vivienne looked at the picture. The woman in the painting had a strong nose and a strong chin and eyes that looked as though they had never once been fooled. "I like her," Vivienne said. "I thought you might." She turned her head to look at him. "Your Grace," she said, "why am I here?" He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the picture and not at her. Then he said, "Because I saw you in the alley. That is not enough of a reason." "It is enough for me," he said. "But if you would like a longer answer, I can give it." "I would." He turned then and faced her. He did not stand too close. He was very careful about that, she noticed. He kept a proper distance between them, even now. "I have been," he said, "in a great many rooms with a great many people. I have watched a great many women perform for me. I do not blame them. It is what they have been taught. But I have never, in any of those rooms, seen a person do what you did in that alley. You did not know I was there. You had no reason to think anyone of consequence was watching. You saw a child. You stepped between the child and the dogs. You did not shout. You did not throw the stone. You did the exact thing that was needed and no more. Then you knelt in a wet street in your best dress and asked the boy his name." He paused. He looked at her steadily. "I have thought about it," he said, "for 4 days. I could not stop thinking about it. So I have brought you here, not to marry you, not to make a promise, only to see if the woman I saw in the alley was the same woman I would meet in a drawing room, or if she was only a trick of the light." Vivienne felt her breath catch, though her face did not change. And? She said, very quietly. And she is the same woman, he said. Which is a thing I did not expect, and which I do not know quite what to do with. There was a long moment then. She could hear the fire behind them. She could hear the fiddle in the other room playing the slow tune again. She could smell the beeswax and the lilies. She could smell, very faintly, something on his coat that was like clean linen and something like pine smoke and something under it she could not name. Your Grace, she said, I am not a wealthy woman. I have no title. My father was a country gentleman. My mother is dead. I have lived in my aunt's house for 6 years. I am 25. I have been out for 7 seasons, and no one has ever asked me to dance twice in the same evening. I know, he said. She blinked. You know? I have inquired. You have inquired, she said slowly. I do not like surprises, he said. So I have inquired. What I have learned does not change anything I saw in the alley. She did not know what to say to that. She looked back at the painting of the grandmother, because she needed a moment where his eyes were not on her face. I am not asking you, he said, for any answer tonight. I am not asking you for any answer next week. I am telling you what I have seen, and I am telling you I would like to see more of you, and if you tell me no, I will bow and walk away, and you will not be troubled again. She thought about that for a long moment. You said in the alley, she said, that I did not need help. You did not. Then what do you want with me now? He was quiet again. He looked at his grandmother's picture. I do not know yet, he said. That is the honest answer. I only know that I would like to find out. The next weeks were slow and strange. He called at her aunt's house, properly, in the proper hours. Her aunt, who had never before been called upon by anyone of note, spent the first visit in such a state of nerves that she said nothing beyond yes, Your Grace, and no, Your Grace, for the entire quarter hour. Her cousin Prudence, who had spent her whole life being told she was the prettier one, sat in the corner with a face like a small closed door. The Duke did not speak to Prudence. He did not need to. He spoke to Vivienne, and only to Vivienne, and he asked her questions about the books she liked and about the countryside where she had grown up. He listened when she answered. He did not interrupt. When she finished a thought, he waited a moment to see if she had more to say. If she did, he let her say it. Prudence tried, on the third visit, to interrupt with a small, clever remark about how Vivienne had never been the reading sort, really, and had only recently taken up books to seem clever. It was a small cruelty of the kind Prudence had been practicing since they were girls. The Duke turned his head and looked at Prudence. He did not say anything. He only looked. He looked at her the way a man might look at an unpleasant sound he had noticed, but did not intend to acknowledge. Prudence stopped talking. She did not try that again. He asked on his fourth visit if Vivienne might walk with him in the small park at the end of the street. Her aunt at once said yes, before Vivienne could speak. So Vivienne put on her cloak and her bonnet and they went out together, with her aunt's maid trailing at a proper distance behind. The park was small and had a gravel path that went around a pond. It was a bright, cold day. The sky was pale blue. Their breath came out in small white clouds. The gravel crunched under their feet in a steady rhythm. He did not offer his arm this time. He walked at her side with his hands behind his back. You are very careful, Your Grace, she said, after they had gone halfway around the pond. In what way? You do not touch me. You do not stand too close. You do not say anything a woman might mistake. I do not wish to be mistaken. She thought about that. Because you are careful of my reputation? Because I am careful of you. She almost stopped walking. She did not. She kept the rhythm of her steps. Your Grace, she said, I do not know quite what to do with you. You do not have to do anything with me. You have only to walk. I am very good at being walked next to. She laughed. It was a small laugh, surprised out of her. She had not laughed in company for a long time. The sound of her own laugh was strange in her ears. He looked at her sideways. The corner of his mouth moved. There, he said quietly. That is a thing I had not seen you do before. I do not laugh often. I know. You have inquired, she said. I have. She shook her head slowly, but she was smiling, only a little, and the cold air was sharp in her lungs, and the ducks on the pond were making small noises among the reeds. and for the first time in a very long time she felt something in her chest that was not tiredness. That was in early winter. By the end of winter, everyone in her small circle knew that the Duke of Ravensmere called at her aunt's house twice a week. By the beginning of spring, the whole of the town knew, and half the county besides. It was in every letter that went out of every house. It was whispered behind every fan. Some people were pleased for her, some people were not. Her cousin Prudence was not. Prudence had grown up being told, again and again by her mother, that she was the pretty one and Vivian was only the clever one, and that this was the way of the world, and that Prudence would marry well and Vivian would go quietly into an aunt's role somewhere and be useful. Prudence had believed this all her life. It was the frame around her whole picture of herself. Now that frame was cracking, and Prudence did not know how to sit still inside a cracked frame. She began to make small remarks about Vivienne's dress, about her hair, about her manners. She made them at meals. She made them when Vivienne came down the stairs. She made them in the drawing room after dinner. Vivienne heard them all and did not answer any of them. Then, at last, Prudence made a remark in company. It was at a spring assembly in the town's small assembly rooms. It was a public evening, and the whole neighborhood was there, and the Duke was expected. He had said he would come. He had not yet arrived. The room was full of women in their spring silks and men in their good coats. The candles were smoking a little. The air smelled of hot wax and rose water and, from the kitchens below, roast fowl. Vivienne was standing near the wall as she always did. She was wearing a pale green gown that had been made for her, this time out of new silk her aunt had at last agreed to buy for her, since it would not do to have her look shabby before a duke. Prudence came up to her with a small, smiling face. She had a group of friends behind her, 3 young women who had been Prudence's friends since they were 15, and who laughed at everything Prudence said. "Vivienne," said Prudence, quite loudly, so that people around them could hear. "You look very well tonight. It is such a pity, is it not, that the Duke will not be coming after all." Vivienne did not move. "I had not heard he would not come." "Oh?" Prudence's eyes were bright. "But surely you knew. It is all over town. He has been called back to London on urgent business. Very urgent. Some say he is to be engaged to Lady something or other. I cannot recall the name. One of the very great families. Of course, one always knew it would end that way. Dukes do not marry country nobodies. It was very kind of him to be so gentle about it, do you not think?" The 3 friends laughed behind their fans. Vivienne felt her face go still. She did not feel anger, not yet. She felt the way she had felt in the alley when the dog had lifted its lip. She felt very quiet inside. She knew, in that moment, that Prudence was lying. She had received a note from him only that morning saying he would be at the assembly. But Prudence did not know that. Prudence had made up a piece of cruelty and thrown it into the middle of a public room to see what would break. The people around them were listening. Vivienne could feel it. She could feel them waiting for her to cry, or to argue, or to run from the room. She did none of those things. She turned to Prudence. She let her eyes rest on Prudence's face for one long breath. She did not raise her voice. "Prudence," she said quietly, "you have grown up in the same house with me. You have known me since we were children. If you truly believe that I would break in this room because you have said something unkind, then you have not been paying attention. That is not my fault. But it is a thing I am sorry for, on your account." She said it without heat. She said it the way one might say, "The weather is turning cold," or "The candles are smoking." Not unkindly, only clearly. Then she turned. She did not hurry. She walked, at the same pace she always walked, along the wall toward the door of the small side room where the refreshments were laid out. She did not look at anyone. She simply walked away. Behind her there was a small silence. Then a small murmur. Then the murmur grew, but not against her. Vivienne could hear the tone of it as she went. It was the sound of a room deciding, all at once, that it had just watched something. She did not know that the Duke had arrived some minutes earlier. She did not know that he had been standing at the far side of the ballroom, half hidden by a pillar, and that he had heard every word. She only found this out later. At the moment, she went into the side room, and she stood by the window with a glass of lemon water in her hand, and she pressed her fingers around the cold glass until they hurt. He came in a moment later. He did not speak. He came and stood at her side. He did not touch her. He only stood there, close enough that if she wished to lean, she could. She did not lean. She was not ready to lean. "Your Grace," she said, without looking at him. "I heard," he said. "I know. I do not wish to embarrass you further. I will go if you like." "No," she said. "Stay," he stayed. They stood together at the window for a long moment. The glass was cool under her fingers. The room behind them was quiet. Someone dropped a fork somewhere, and someone else laughed nervously. Outside the window, a lamp was burning in the street, and a light rain had begun to fall, tapping softly on the pane. "I would not have asked you," she said quietly, "to do anything about that. I know. I do not need you to fight my battles. I know that too. Then why are you here?" "Because," he said, "I did not wish you to be alone in this room. That is all. You are not alone in this room." She let out a breath she had not known she was holding. She still did not lean, but she nodded, once, very slightly. It was enough. He went home that night to his own house, which was 3 streets away, in the good part of the town where he kept a small house for when he was in the country. He went into his study, and he shut the door, and he sat down at his desk. He did not read. He did not write. He sat. He was thinking about the girl called Prudence and the small hot cruelty in her mouth. He was thinking about the 3 friends laughing behind their fans. He was thinking about the way Vivienne had said, "If you truly believe that I would break in this room." He was thinking about how she had walked to the side room without hurrying, and how she had stood at the window with her hand around a cold glass, and how she had not leaned against him though he could tell she wanted to. He was thinking about her aunt's house, where she still slept, and where she would have to walk in tomorrow morning and sit at breakfast with the girl who had tried to shame her in public. He was a man who solved problems. He looked at his problem for a long time. He got up. He rang for his secretary. His secretary was a small, tidy man named Mr. Ansley, who had served him for 11 years. "Mr." Ansley came in quietly and stood by the desk. "Ansley," said the Duke. "The child." "Your Grace?" "The boy. The beggar boy. Tom, she took him to a laundress at the edge of town." "Mrs. Hollow, you have looked into it." "I have, Your Grace. Is the boy still there?" "He is, Your Grace. He is thriving, so far as I understand it. Mrs. Hollow speaks well of him. She is a decent woman. But she cannot keep him forever. She has said as much. She was going to have to give him over to the parish in a month or so. She is not to do that. She is not to give him to the parish. She is to keep him, or if she cannot, he is to come to my estate. There is work there for a boy his age when he is older. Until then he is to be schooled. Do you understand me?" "I do, Your Grace. Miss Marchmont is not to know. Not from me, not from you, not from Mrs. Hollow, if we can help it." Mr. Ansley did not blink. "Very good, Your Grace. See that Mrs. Hollow has what she needs. Quietly, do not use my name. Use the general account. Send it monthly. Yes, Your Grace. That will be all." Mr. Ansley bowed and went out. The Duke sat for a long time after that. He looked at the fire. He did not think of Vivienne then. He thought of the boy in the alley, thin and wet, with the piece of bread pressed to his chest. He thought of how it had been, the moment when she had knelt in the wet street and asked the boy his name. He did not tell anyone. He did not tell her. He did not tell his mother when he wrote to her the next week. He did not mention it to his oldest friend at the club. He did not mention it in his prayers, if he prayed, which he mostly did not. It was a thing he had done because a thing had needed doing. That was all. Spring became summer. He continued to call at her aunt's house. He continued to walk with her in the park. He took her, once with her aunt, to see the great house of a friend of his some 10 miles into the country, and she walked in the gardens there for 2 hours, and asked the head gardener careful questions about the roses, and the head gardener afterward told the Duke that Miss knew what she was about. They spoke of many things on their walks. They spoke of books, and of the weather, and of a plan he had for a school on his estate, and of a small worry she had about an old servant of her aunt's, who was going blind and would need to be provided for. He listened when she spoke about the servant. He remembered the servant's name. Later she would find out, though not from him, that he had quietly written to her aunt's steward to ask that the old servant be pensioned properly, but at the time she did not know it. He was, she began to realize, a man who did quiet things. That summer, at a garden party at Ravensmere House, the moment came. She had not been expecting it. She had come to the garden party with her aunt because she had been invited. She had put on the pale green silk again because she had almost no other good gown, and no one at the party would care in any case. There were many people there, old friends of the Duke's family, old women in wide hats, young women in bright colours, men in white gloves, small children running on the lawn. The whole long green lawn stretched down to a lake, and there were tables set up under an oak tree, and servants moving quietly among the guests with trays. The Duke's mother was there. She had come down from London for the occasion. She was a tall, thin woman with the same grey eyes as her son, and a mouth that did not smile easily. She had looked at Vivienne when Vivienne was presented to her, and she had said only, "Miss Marchmont," and inclined her head half an inch and moved on. That was all. Vivienne had understood. The mother had not decided yet. The mother was watching. Prudence was there too. Prudence had somehow got herself invited. Vivienne suspected it was through a mutual friend and against the Duke's own wishes, though he had not made any fuss about it when Prudence had appeared on the lawn. He had merely nodded at her once, coolly, and moved on. Prudence had spent the whole afternoon standing in groups where she thought the Duke's mother might notice her. Late in the afternoon, when the shadows were growing long across the lawn, the Duke came to Vivienne where she was standing by the lake. He came alone. He said, without any small talk, "Walk with me a moment." She walked with him. He led her along the edge of the lake, away from the crowd, toward a small stone bench under a willow. The bench was very old. It was grey with weather. The grass around it was long, and it smelled of warm earth and the green smell of the willow leaves. He did not sit. He stood in front of her. "I have something to say," he said. "I would rather say it alone first, before I say it anywhere else." She looked up at him. The sun was low. It made his eyes very bright. "Say it," she said. "I would like you," he said, "to be my wife. I am not asking you to answer today. I am not asking you to answer tomorrow. I have thought about this for a long time. I would like you to think about it for as long as you need. I would rather have your no in 6 months than your yes in a week." She stood very still. A dragonfly went past her head. She could hear the small lap of water against the reeds at the edge of the lake. She could smell the willow leaves. She could smell, faintly, the dust of the path and the far-off smell of horses from the drive. "Your Grace," she said. "Alaric," he said, "when we are alone." She looked at him for a long moment. "Alaric," she said, and the sound of his name in her own mouth was strange and warm. "Why? You have asked me that before. I am asking you again." He was quiet. He looked past her, at the lake, at the willow, at nothing. "Because," he said slowly, "I have never in my life met a person who was so exactly the same when she thought no one was watching as when she knew everyone was. I have never met a person who did the small hard thing without needing to be praised for it. I have never met a person I trusted before I met you. That is a strange thing to say, at my age. I am aware of it. But it is true." She did not answer at once. "There is one more thing," he said. "It is not to persuade you. It is only because I do not wish you to say yes without knowing it. It concerns the boy." She looked up sharply. "Tom? Tom, is he ill? Is he hurt?" "He is well. He is more than well. He is at Mrs. Hollow's still. He has grown. He can read a little now. He will not be given to the parish. He will not be given anywhere. I have seen to it." She stared at him. "You," she said. "Yes, you have been paying for him, yes, since when? Since the week after the alley." Her hand rose to her mouth and stopped halfway. She let it fall. "You did not tell me." "No, why did you not tell me?" "Because," he said, "it was not a thing I did for you. It was a thing I did because a small boy was going to be given to the parish, and I could stop that from happening, and so I did. I did not want you to think I was buying you with a child. I was not." But you asked me, once, why I did what I did in the alley by standing there and not helping. I told you then that you had not needed help. That was true. But I did not tell you that I had gone home that night and thought about the boy. I could not stop thinking about the boy. I did not want him to be given to the parish. So I saw to it. That is all. She stood in front of him. The willow moved in the small wind. The lake was very quiet. Somewhere very far away, a child laughed on the lawn. How did I find out? She said, very quietly. You said you did not tell me. I am telling you now, only because you are asking me to marry you. Yes, would you have told me otherwise? No. She looked at him for a long moment. She saw that he was not lying to her. She saw that he was standing in front of her, not the way a man stands who has done a fine thing and wants to be praised for it, but the way a man stands who has done a thing he considered simply correct. She understood something then that she had been slowly understanding for months. He was a man who did not need to be known. It was a very strange and very rare thing. She did not say yes. Not then. He had told her not to. And she needed time. She said, quietly, "Give me 2 weeks. You may have 2 years. 2 weeks," she said. "Then I will give you an answer." He inclined his head. 2 weeks. 2 weeks later she said yes. She said it in his study at Ravensmere House, in the late afternoon, with the sun coming through the tall windows and falling in long yellow bars across the floor. He had received her formally, with her aunt in the next room, and he had sat behind his desk and she had sat in front of it, and it had all been very proper. And then her aunt had needed to step out for a moment about a message, and he had risen and come around the desk and stood by the window, and she had risen too. She walked to him. "Alaric," she said. "Yes, I have thought about it." "Yes," she looked up at him. His face was quieter than she had ever seen it. "Yes," she said. He did not seize her. He did not kiss her. He did not sweep her against him the way men did in the small novels Prudence read. He took her right hand. He drew off her glove, finger by finger, slowly. He held her bare hand in his own for a long moment. His hand was warm. She could feel the small hard place at the base of his thumb where he had held a riding whip since he was a boy. She could feel her own pulse under her wrist. Then he lifted her hand and pressed his lips, very briefly, to the back of it, not to her palm, not to her wrist, to the back of her hand, the way a man presses his lips to a thing he has decided to keep. He let her hand go. "Thank you," he said. That was all. That was the moment. They were married 3 months later, in the small chapel on his estate, with only a few guests. Her aunt was there, wearing her best silk, weeping in a way she did not want anyone to see. Prudence was not there. Prudence had not been invited. There had been no fuss made about it. Prudence had simply not been on the list. Vivienne understood that this was the Duke's doing, and she did not object to it, though she did, some months later, quietly write to Prudence and say that she hoped one day they might see each other again. Prudence did not answer. That, Vivienne thought, was Prudence's choice, and she would leave it to Prudence. They took the boy Tom into their household as a page, and later as an apprentice to the estate steward, and later still, though this was many years off, as a young man who managed a small piece of their land quite well, and married a young woman from the village, and had children of his own. Mrs. Hollow the laundress was given a small cottage on the edge of the estate for the rest of her life. The old servant of Vivienne's aunt, who was going blind, was quietly pensioned, and lived out her years in a small clean room with a fire and a cat. None of these things were announced. None were spoken of at parties. None were written into letters. They simply happened, one at a time, because there was now a household where such things were seen to. 1 year later, in the winter, Vivienne sat by the fire in the small sitting room she had made her own in Ravensmere House. It was late in the afternoon. The fire had burned down to a steady red. The room smelled of applewood smoke and, faintly, of the dried lavender she had put in a bowl on the mantelpiece. Outside the window, snow was falling in slow, soft flakes. She could hear, very faintly, the sound of the horses being brought in for the night from the far stables. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked in its old, patient way. She had a book open in her lap, but she was not reading. She was watching the snow. Her husband came in quietly. He did not announce himself. He never did. He crossed the room in his stocking feet, which was a thing she had discovered he did when he was tired and did not wish to be heard, and he sat down in the chair opposite hers with a small sound that was almost a sigh. He looked at her over the low fire. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The clock ticked. The fire made a small sound. Somewhere in the house, a door closed softly, and a servant's step went along a corridor and faded away. He reached out then, slowly across the little space between the chairs, and he took her hand. Her bare hand this time, for she had taken off her gloves an hour ago. His hand was warm. He turned her hand over in his own and looked at her palm for a moment as if it were a small map. Then he closed his fingers around hers and settled back in his chair and closed his eyes. She looked at him a little while longer. Then she looked back at the snow. The fire ticked down. The room grew a little darker. Neither of them let go. And in the quiet warm space between two chairs by a winter fire, a woman who had stood once in a wet alley between three dogs and a frightened beggar boy sat holding the hand of the man who had seen her do it, and knew, at last, that she had been seen all along.